Now it's time to introduce our next person. Linda, what can you tell us?
So our next speaker is Tonya Sutphin. She is currently the Director of Quality Assurance at Janelle Group in Schenectady. She has a BA in Mathematics from Smith College and an MA in Mathematics from Boston College. So let's welcome Tonya on her next speech.
Thank you, Linda. So I'm sharing my screen now, just 1 second. There we go. So can you see my slides? There we go. So today my goal is to give you an overview of QA and some common challenges that we have, some real world challenges that people maybe that aren't experienced in QA or right out of school or new in their career maybe just aren't aware of. So first, I'm just going to give a quick overview of what is QA, because some people might not be aware. I don't think they teach it in school. Maybe they do, but so far, everybody I've asked out of school hasn't really learned about it in college. So QA is software testing, or at least that's the QA I'm going to talk about today. So software testing to try to find bugs and prevent them from going out to our users. So why do we do it? Because we want to have quality software. We want the company to be successful. We want to make money. We want our company to make money. That's why we want to find bugs, because we just don't want to have buggy software, right? We take pride in what we make, and we want to make sure that we're delivering quality to our end users. So when do we do it? This depends on the project team that you're on. And it used to be that we all had waterfall process, and we would always do all of our testing after development finished. Some huge release, maybe months or years of working on something. Now we're really moving towards a more agile process, or at least that's very hot current last few years. And we try to test more, if that's our approach, test more in line with development. So developers work on changes and we're testing them quickly rather than waiting for a big delivery. And where do we do our testing? So this depends, of course, on your project, but ideally you have your own dedicated test environment. So this would mean that you have a QA environment or a UAT that maybe you use for your testing instead of testing where the developers are doing their work. Because if the developers have their own sandbox or they're playing around with their code, you can't really test that code because it's going to change and break as they figure out their new feature development. So that's just a quick terminology so that we're kind of on the same page as I go through this. So I want to talk about how everything's connected. So that sounds so cliche, but it's so true more and more in life. So in nature, everything's connected, right? We know there's predators, prey, there's the butterfly effect, how one thing can affect something so far later in time. So everything's connected. And that's also true in software development. So I say it in life, and then I come back to it more and more in work, where one decision that's made at one point affects something that you might not even think about, or how we do our work. So here's our look at how everything's connected for software development. So we have our software development lifecycle, requirements, design, implementation, testing, and so on. So of course they're all connected, because if you look at it in one direction, they all flow like this. Now, I used to, years ago, I had a position at Plug Power, and that's a company where I was a developer working on fuel cell software. And at the time, the CTO for the company, this was his mantra: everything's connected. He had it on company shirts that we had, and it seemed cliche, didn't really think about it. You know, it was his catchphrase, and he would say it at the opportune times. But I do come back and think about that more and more as time passes, that it's just so true. It doesn't really represent the meaning. It's so easy to say. But if you look at it in terms of software development, I have these arrows here. But it doesn't mean that requirements only impacts design. It doesn't mean that implementation only impacts testing. So a decision can be made during requirements, or an assumption could be made that a user's only going to use the system in a certain way. And that affects so many things. And that's just one example. How we do our implementation affects how we do our testing. our communication structure within the team. So having fostering an open culture where people are willing and able to ask questions and raise some concerns or maybe clarify things, that impacts how well we can do our software development. If you have that open culture, then you're going to foster maybe identifying issues or saying, well, how am I going to test this? Or how is the user going to use that? Things that sometimes just get squashed down or nobody asks or people are afraid to ask if you don't have that culture. So everything's connected, and software QA is so impacted by every single phase in the life cycle. If you have unit tests, that's going to help with testing because you'll find some problems before they get implemented. If you have DevOps, like Diana was talking about, and you have the ability to have these automated tools helping you identify issues at every stage, that's going to help you find problems sooner. So everything's connected in the world, in life, and in software development. It's just so true. All right, so here's some data on the cost of fixing bugs at different stages in software development. So many of you probably have seen this before, but I thought it was pertinent today for my talk. I'm really gauging this towards people who don't really know much about software testing. And looking at how much it costs if we do find an issue in testing. So here, if you find an issue during the design stage of a project, it'll cost you 1x to fix that problem. You haven't gone through development, you haven't pushed it downstream, so it's easy to fix. I mean, there's less impact and you don't have to go back. Maybe you have to change some requirements. If you find an issue during development, that costs 6x to fix it as compared to if you found it during design. And then if you wait and you don't find it till testing, that's 15x the cost for fixing that problem. So it really shows you how finding problems upstream really benefits the project. So we want to find ways to identify problems as early as possible and not always depend on the testing team to find those issues, because it doesn't benefit you to have that extra cost fixing everything downstream. So some ways that we can do that is we can have really effective requirements grooming. So I think something that really factors into that is, like I mentioned before, fostering open communication. I've been on requirements grooming calls where people are afraid to speak up because maybe there's people on the team that are just going to, condescend or belittle them or shut them down and not even let them ask questions. You're not going to have effective requirements grooming in that case. But if you have really effective communication and people feel comfortable, that will help bring out some questions during requirements grooming. It's not perfect and you won't necessarily always find it, but it does help. Similarly, code reviews. If you have effective code reviews, that'll help identify problems. Unit tests, there's lots of things. I only mentioned a few here. But really, we want to try to find problems as early as possible. QA is after development, so we can only do so much, but we can help if we're involved in those requirements calls and requirements meetings to help ask questions like, how will we test this? Because sometimes those things aren't thought about, and that helps someone. The developers may have to implement things differently if we have to, maybe there's not a way in the UI to test something. So those are all really effective ways to help reduce problems. All right, so now I'm going down in the weeds a little bit. But if I'm talking about QA and what is it, a major thing is manual testing and automated testing. So automated testing is really hot right now. It's a hot topic. People want to jump on the automated testing bandwagon, and it is great, but there's a lot of cost, not just monetary cost, but work that goes into it. So what is manual testing? What is automated testing? Manual testing is something that a human does. So you hire someone, they learn the application and they have to click, or if it's a UI application or maybe back end, they have to test that application using their brain and understanding it and executing those tests. Automated testing is where you script your tests. So it doesn't have a human actually doing the tests. A human has to write the tests and script them, but then they can be run either at a scheduled time or you could trigger them manually. And the benefit of that is, one of the benefits is that it's much faster. So if I want to test logging into an application and making sure that I get brought to a home page, if I have a username and a password, that's going to take me 10 minutes to do for 10 different users with different permissions. But an automated script can do that in like 5 seconds. So the benefit of automated testing is that it's much faster, so you can cover more because you have more time to run those tests, or it takes less time to run those tests. So manual testing, a big challenge is time. We don't have enough time because we're in this release cycle and we have a release date and we need to make that date. So a common challenge is that the development team maybe needs longer to finish their changes, and we have a schedule and QA had X amount of time to do their testing, and maybe development had to use some of that time. And so now we have less time to do our testing. The release date's not changing. So manual testing, okay, we were not going to have as much time, so we can't test everything. So we have to figure out, what are we going to test based on knowing the changes in the system, understanding the way the system's designed and what impacts what features. And we just have to prioritize. And there's risk involved in that. There's always risk. But we have to prioritize and make a decision. If we had automated tests for, say, 70% of the application, then we would have confidence that that 70% got tested. We may find errors, but we won't find those errors if we're doing manual testing because we don't have time to do that coverage. It is impossible to test every single feature in an application in a reasonable release time. I say reasonable. People don't want more than a week calendar time for testing. Sometimes if you're in a Scrum process, it's days. It really depends on the project. But you don't have months unless you're some like really old project that's on old waterfall where they have a year to do changes and you have a year to test them or something like that. That's just not really the way it's working now in software development. So automated testing is great because we can run more tests faster. It identifies problems sooner, because if we can run a script in an hour that tests 70% of the application, you know within an hour what fails. If a human's doing it and it takes them a week, they might run that failed test case on the last day. So you lose that time to fix those issues. So there's trade-off. There's a lot that goes into it. And it really needs a dedicated team. So a challenge with automated testing is, from what I've seen, a lot of companies will try to just have it be a side project, and they want to do automated testing, but they don't want to invest in the resources for it due to cost. And so it'll be a side project, but I've never seen that succeed. You really need to have a dedicated automated testing, at least one person, to write those scripts and to maintain those scripts, because those scripts are going to fail. When the UI changes and all of your DOM elements change, or something changes about the way you're referencing things in your script, that's going to break your script, and you need to maintain them. So there's a big trade-off. There's a lot that goes into it. Automated testing is great if you can do it, but you can't just do it on a whim. It's a really an investment that has to be taken seriously. So that comes into, if you're in QA, you just have to find some balance. And every time there's challenges, right? So sometimes we're going to have not enough time. This is the classic project management triangle. You have scope, time, and cost. And all of those affect quality. You've probably seen this before. This is not anything new, at least to me, or, sorry if it's boring to you, but you can adjust one of those and still have quality. So if you want to add scope to your project, you can do that if you can also add time or cost, but you can't just change scope and not adjust your other edges of your triangle if you want to have quality. If you're willing to sacrifice quality, yeah, you can add scope, reduce time, and cut cost, but you're really not going to get a good end result. So in QA, it's our responsibility to find that balance. It's never the same. It's the project, it's the release, it's the team, and lots of things factor into that. So as a QA person, it's just our responsibility to speak up and raise risk and ask those questions and be willing to
Tonya,
do that. Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts as we give folks a moment to get some questions into the chat?
Thanks, Chad. So yeah, this is my last slide. So basically my final thoughts are the struggle is real. You know, it's challenging. Software development is challenging as a whole. QA, we just have to try to apply our best practices. We know in life we should eat well, exercise, and save money for retirement, but we don't always do that. And it's not because we're lazy, but there's challenges. Maybe I can't afford to do food prep or take the time. I'm not doing it because I don't know better. Same thing with QA. We just have to try to do those best practices even when they're hard and even when they don't come easy. So that's it. Thanks, Chad, for my time.
No, that's great. No, that's great. When you were speaking, is it true that software development will happen with and then the QA is thought of completely later? I thought we were done with that, but do you still see that happen where it's okay, we're almost done with this? I mean, maybe we should test it now.
Even on sprints, the development team takes their time to develop and then hands over. It may be tickets. It might not be all at once, but I still do see that linear relationship. I've seen projects where that's not the case, but I definitely still think that is a way software development's being done still.
Yeah, I see. So maybe they know they need that it needs to be done, but you know, on the not as frequently, or it's still there's still a struggle. It's still not something that is being taken with open arms. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's growth of the team, and you can't do it in a bubble. You can't just have the QA team want to do it one way. You have to have everybody embrace that approach, because as everything's connected, if we're going to have QA tests with developers, then that adjusts the timeline for all of the teams, all of the people. Business reps have to get their requirements at a certain time and have to be willing to have discussions or availability or quick turnaround. It affects the whole team, has to embrace that. So I did see a question. Do I have time to answer?
Yeah, you have.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
So Akshay, I saw. Oh, go ahead.
No, go. Yeah,
okay. Good. He asked what tools we've used for automation. So personally, myself, there was a tool that Janelle Group created, which is now retired, which I have used, which was called Reflex. Mostly, I'm most versed in the Selenium-based automation tools. So Nightwatch is the one that I currently use. There's a tool, Mocha, which I'm learning. Those are the ones that I'm most familiar with, but basically Selenium. But I also have been exposed to Test Complete. I don't use that myself, but in the past had used that, which has UI framework, so you can record your screen in addition to doing scripting. But those are the ones that I've used.
So I guess I got to ask this, and you know this only needs a short answer, but with all this automation, are they taking over our jobs?
Not yet. I think that would help us if the robots were taking over our jobs, because then we could give them work to do and do our work and have them help us.
Right. And I think you said something about, you know, some of the things that you automate are sometimes redundant and not what a human wants to really be doing with their time.
Yeah. And it takes a human to do that programming. So they're never going to be able to take over for us. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
I'd love to automate all the little trivial things and just do the more complicated stuff myself.
Yes. Yep. It is neat to watch an automated test tool run a website, right?
It is.
And then see all the things happen, and you know, I take a little pleasure in seeing that happen.
It is cool to watch.
Yeah.
It's nice to have the robots to do the boring stuff, and we do the challenging one, right?
Yes.
Totally agree. I will share my screen if that's okay with you, Tonya.
Oh, yes. I can stop sharing.
Yep. So, well, thank you so much, Tonya. We're going to transition.